Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Danny Sebright, President of the U.S. U.A.E. Business Council. Thanks for attending the panel today on threats and opportunities for U.S. security policy in the Middle East. We all know the region is once again undergoing incredible and enormous change. A new generation of leaders in many countries, such as Saudi Arabia, have sought to implement bold visions to reshape their societies and the broader region. The Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran and Iran's increasingly assertive actions abroad have almost brought the region to yet another military confrontation earlier this year. And at the same time, people throughout the region have also taken to the streets to air socioeconomic, political grievances in places as far afield as Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Algeria, and of course Sudan. Meanwhile, conflicts continue to fester in Libya and Syria, drawing in other regional powers such as Turkey and Russia. These dramatic changes pose threats as well as opportunities to reshape the region for the better. To discuss the above, I'm joined today by a distinguished panel whose accomplishments are really numerous to list in such a short time. So I'm going to ask you to refer to their bios in the background materials that you have. But Marty, let me just go down the list. Marty Martin, whose experience includes over 29 years of U.S. government service in U.S. Special Forces, the National Security Agency, and the CIA. We have Tom Bossert, a former Homeland Security advisor to two presidents, and a longtime national security expert in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Michael Corbin, friend and colleague, the former ambassador to the U.A.E., to the United Arab Emirates, and also a career diplomat whose service spans the region. He served in many, many countries throughout the Middle East in his 30 years in government. And finally, Dominique, the CEO and founder of PiiSec, is a U.S. military intelligence officer with a number of years of experience, particularly in the area of cyber. So it's a really fascinating group of folks today to talk about the region. Let's just jump right in, and I'd like to, if we could, start with the GCC summit that occurred in Riyadh today. And much to speculation over the last month that we were going to see a huge rapprochement with regard to the GCC rift. In contrast, the Emir of Qatar did not accept King Salman's invitation and did not come to the summit. He sent the Prime Minister. Let's jump in and talk about that for a second. What does that mean? Ambassador Corbin, from your perspective as a regional expert, the fact that where does the GCC rift stand, and what are the opportunities that might come for the future in this regard?
I think there's progress that's taking place behind the scenes, and I don't think the Emir was really expected to go. The invitation was the important part. There are other contacts that are going on. The bottom line is, economically, for Expo 2020 and for the World Cup in Doha in 2022, I think there's going to be some sort of rapprochement, and it's just a question of when.
Thank you. And the Emir was invited last year, and he didn't come either. So it's sort of continuing. Marty, what do you think from that standpoint? What is there an opportunity here going forward?
I believe there's an opportunity, and it also comes within the context that the GCC needs to solidify and be unified vis-a-vis, I'm sure, a lot of the threats previously discussed today, and obviously that we're seeing vis-a-vis Iran. I think instead of looking at it from a total negative aspect, I think that those developments can possibly encourage and motivate and push the GCC to fix this problem.
So we've talked a lot earlier, and many of the sessions earlier in the day, on the threats posed in the region and on the threats to U.S. power and power projection here. I was hoping we could speak a little bit in the panel about opportunities and maybe try to bring some of those out, opportunities for American policymaking going forward. Tom, from your perspective, what are some of those opportunities with regard to the GCC rift and that pivot with regard to how it affects our Iran policy?
I'm far more optimistic, and I don't want to hold anyone blameless for the rift and how we got here, but I think that the worst is behind us. In fact, I'd be shocked if it wasn't. I think that's the view of the U.S. president at this stage, and he was one that was open to a lot of the concerns of the Emiratis and others towards Qatari banking policy and so forth. I think that I'm not as concerned with it. I don't want to dismiss it or hand wave all the hard work away that's before us or in front of us, but I think the opportunities for the GCC, and I have a slightly different view, have now become vital interests for the United States. We've all talked about for, I think, a long time, the need to diversify, and we've heard it today quite a bit, away from oil export. But that used to be for the regional benefit. Now, in my view, as we head to this kind of bipolar U.S.-China world, it's going to be for the United States' long-term strategic benefit. And if we don't provide some means to encourage and incentivize some better cooperative behavior with this region, with the U.A.E., not just militarily, but economically, we'll be the ones that wake up regretting the future and not this region. I think the region is self-incentivized to move away from just oil. But I think the choice now of export partners and of business partners and investment partners is becoming one of prove to me what you can do and what you can provide and how sustainable and reliable our partnership with you will be. And it's upon the United States to demonstrate better behavior.
Thank you. Dominique, the cyber threat was actually a key component of some aspects of how the GCC rift may have started, and Iran's potential role in that is still a question and still something that folks talk about. Where's the opportunity here going forward from your unique perspective for the future with the GCC rift and stopping Iranian aggression in this regard?
I think definitely just opening the platform for speaking, reaching out, and trying to create some sort of a sense of camaraderie and diplomacy. And I think the most important thing really would be that, especially for the U.S. businesses, cybersecurity as a service. It opens up a huge opportunity for us in the region. It opens up tons of opportunities to help the U.A.E. to grow cyber-wise, and to teach them and to reach out and create a lot of friendships and better relationships there. I know the forecasted loss to cybersecurity for 2021, I believe, is over $6 trillion, and each year that actually increases about 6%. So by the time we actually reach 2021, God knows.
Do we have numbers for this region in that regard, or is that global?
It's globally, absolutely. Yeah. But I think, small businesses and owner-managed businesses, it's about 90%, I think, of the GDP. And most of those people don't have a very robust cyber program. And cyber hygiene is extremely important. With all of the ransomware we've been seeing, the loss is just going to continue to grow. Sophistication just continues to grow. And I think that is a very, very big platform for us.
So Marty and Tom, the big question, maximum pressure, the U.S. policy, is it working? And then we have the U.A.E.'s role, diplomatic role that's playing out with regard to Iran, sort of side by side. Is that coordinated with the U.S. maximum pressure campaign? Talk a little bit about that from the standpoint of how we move forward and what are the opportunities here in the next year, especially in a presidential election year back in the United States.
Well, as we all know, some of our presidential candidates, when they're in the election year, sometimes they say some things that are pretty inconsistent. And then later, when they're elected, they seem to shift on that. That's not one party or the other, that's just politics. But I think in this case, the maximum pressure, that certainly, they feel it's uncomfortable. It's obviously got an impact on their economy. I would say that's also part of the reason you're having the demonstrations. But to me, there needs to be another aspect of this. It can't all be totally negative. We don't want, obviously, we want to avoid war. At the same time, there needs to be some positive outreach, whether it's coordinated or not, toward Iran to relieve that pressure.
Tom, are the protests happening right now in Iran a real threat to the regime at the moment, in your opinion?
They're encouraging, and I hope that they continue in some way without the violence and unnecessary loss of life. But I'm encouraged by the pressure, by the effect of this maximum pressure policy the United States has put forth. In that regard, I think the President of the United States is right. I think he's been consistent. I think he'll remain that way. There's a few obvious, pressure valves that I'd prefer be closed, Iraq being one of them, and a worrying development. But maybe another twist on that, I'm not entirely certain that there'll be an externally mandated way to end this. So if it doesn't come from the inside, I don't think it'll come.
Okay.
And two things of note. The first is this president, the United States' president, his response, President Trump's, to the shoot down of the Global Hawk was to, there's stories about how this went on internally, but ultimately it was that he didn't find use of force to be necessary, justified, or to have any achievable objective tied to it other than just punishment. And interestingly, he chose not to do it as a result. That makes him different than the last 3 U.S. presidents, so that's encouraging as well. And then the second and last point on that for me is this notion of cooperation that I started with as my theme. All the second tier consequences of whatever we do in the United States, in this region in particular, against and to Iran, needs to be coordinated carefully, operationally and policy-wise, with people that are going to suffer those second tier consequences. And that means, this city, this room. And so that means cyber as well. And so a lot of what we see is commercial vulnerabilities and commercial analysis of cyber risk and commercial statistics of loss. But then occasionally we see a Russian action that's military in nature that causes $10 billion worth of loss around the world. And all of a sudden we see an Iranian action that might do something similar. And we have a different calculus. It's not insurable, it's not easily recoverable, and it tends to escalate. So I would applaud the consistency of the maximum pressure campaign. I'd say it's encouraging, but I don't think it's around the corner that they're going to succeed within Iran. And then I would plead with everyone to be a little bit more cooperative in their planning and secretive in their planning before we do anything that will cause us, the Emiratis and the United States, to divide further.
So I want to come to Dominique in a second regarding the Iranian policy of shutting down the internet and the impact and how that's played out with the protests. But Ambassador Corbin, first, please. The U.A.E.'s diplomatic initiative that it's undertaken, and obviously with a few others in the region as well, well coordinated. Can you say a few words about that and how that marries up against the maximum pressure campaign?
Well, as a former diplomat, we always want to use all the tools in the tool chest, and you have to gauge what is going to be effective. And the Iranians do have this problem at home now with instability, and they have to deal with it. They're also under threat in Iraq and Lebanon in a way they haven't been before. And so I think that the Emiratis who live in this region and know the Iranians very well are just carrying out sound and wise strategy here.
Thank you, sir. Dominique, so the question of shutting down the internet, shutting down social media in Iran as a tool in cyberspace, has it been effective? Has it stopped the protests?
I mean, I think it definitely impedes. It's harder to coordinate a protest. And a lot of the youth of the region, of course, as anywhere in the globe now, they use social media very extensively to figure out which campaigns they're going to participate in. We saw a lot of that with the 8chan issues over in the U.S. So it's a double-edged sword. I think it's really important for the youth to have access to that, to the internet, to the globe. So that they're not basically given a gag order, and they can express themselves, and they can also share ideas and see the way that other environments are changing. And I think that is helpful, but at the same time, yeah, it does definitely impede those. Ambassador
Corbin, there's other uprisings, transitions occurring in the region from Iraq and Lebanon. Say a few words about, if you would, what are the opportunities there for us, for American policy, in Algeria and Sudan and places like that?
The threats are clear, but I would argue that because of youth's access to information across social media and other platforms, it also offers a huge opportunity for the best provider in the world of these type of systems, which is the U.S. And when we talk about U.S. opportunities here in AI, in development of the digital space, this is a hungry, youthful market that is using these tools and wants U.S. technology. They want Silicon Valley. They need digital infrastructure, digital content to be provided to the Arab world. There's such a tiny percentage of the internet that's actually in Arabic.
But but Silicon Valley's pulling back from that and doesn't want to get involved and doesn't want to get caught up in that's the discussion that's going on right back now in the United States, and doesn't want to get caught up in those. So how do we if that's such an opportunity, and I agree with you, how do we encourage our companies to come out and take part in that?
Well, looking at the example of United Arab Emirates in terms of using AI, in terms of green building codes, in terms of alternative energy, the nuclear plant the rods are going to be inserted in early March. Alternative energy is a thing of the present now. The infrastructure that needs to be built in these countries, especially the high-tech industry, not building bridges and ditches, but complicated projects, call out for U.S. technology and know-how, and these countries are looking for that. And the youth that are in the streets are not just that. And I would argue that the so-called Arab Spring was about coordinating, as Dominique said, coordinating protests. Now it's much different. It's about information, and leaders just can't shut down what's happening in the streets in Lebanon, what's happening in the streets in Algeria, and what's happening in the streets in Sudan and Iraq. So it's real opportunity.
Tom, jump in,
Danny, the
please.
investor is absolutely right, but you have to separate, right? Some of the technology, AI probably won't come from any one small place. It's dependent on larger volume of data and so on. But all the platforms that are available are perfect ready-made opportunities. You know, if manufacturing were the hope of diversification here, you'd have to be worried. There's not a lot of, the means of development here, a lot of the raw materials. But with digital platforms, I think it's the future. I think there's some really positive study developments that you've seen come out of sponsored surveys from the U.A.E. recently to suggest that it is not only a part of, but maybe the future for the services-based industry here and throughout the Middle East to do it on a platform that's digital. So it doesn't have to require importation of Silicon Valley know-how. I think it's going to be organic know-how on already known digital platforms.
So Dominique, then how do the Emiratis, how do other countries in the region protect that? And how important is it right now that they protect those digital platforms that they create here?
It's extremely important. I mean, cybersecurity in general is extremely, extremely important. And I think, just going back to what they were saying very quickly, one of the things that the American people have very much in abundance is the creativity. And I think that using social media and those types of platforms, that is something that spreads throughout the world like rapid fire. And I think that that is something that the youth are extremely well versed in, and that they're going to continue to embrace. And it's going to, I think, increase all of our relationships in the future. Now, I know a lot of people that have come over here and worked cybersecurity as well, and they're trading information, and they're trading ideas, and it's essentially little think tanks. And the youth is obviously going to continue to make the evolution in those ways.
Thank you. We're going to come to the end of the panel here in a few minutes on a discussion about the U.S. role in the region. But before we do, I think to set the stage for that properly, we need to talk about the great power competition that's going on and how it's playing out in this region. Talk about Russia if you like, but particularly China in this region. I'd like to just sort of go down the line from each of you and say a few words from your standpoint about China as a threat or China as an opportunity for the U.S. in this region today.
I think they're a threat if we do not address the youth through the media, and these governments in a very positive way, and understanding way, and transparent. China, with its policy of very determined and focused, will take our place in the leadership role in this area. I think it's important that we understand that we don't have to see the Chinese as necessarily adversarial relationship, but if we engage with them in the commercial area, that would only benefit the region.
And are you worried about Russian growing influence in the region, or do you think that's sort of a passing thing? I'm just curious from your perspective. No, go ahead, Tom.
No.
Marty, and then we'll go to Tom.
If we, by our own policy failures, if we allow them in tactically, such as Syria, I think they will play a role. Putin's very aggressive when it comes to our mistakes. He's a very good chess player. He'll take advantage of that and seek Russian influence. I don't think they can project the economic power. They're no match for the Chinese when it comes to the economic power.
And Tom, U.S. opportunities here with regard to China and the great power competition.
Well, you have a decision, and it's a pretty easy one. And I heard it this morning, and maybe some of you heard it as well. I was actually surprised by how starkly it came across. In the opening first 2 or 3 presentations, we heard from Uae, the representative of the Sovereign Wealth Fund management, who suggested that what he needs to do and his obligation to shareholders, not just to the Sovereign Wealth Fund, but to the other third parties that they manage money on behalf, was to seek alpha. His quote was to find that new percent or 10% or 3% of profit that he could squeeze out of his investment in a short-term fashion. And that's fine. I'm all for investment and profit. But right before that, we heard, I think, wiser words from the Minister of State, who suggested that every decision made requires thoughtful long-term planning and vision on behalf of the people. And he actually said something I very rarely hear. He said, we think about their future in terms of their living and their lifestyle and their comfort and things that weren't just about profit. And so I would suggest that the opportunity here is to make some short-term decisions that don't result in short-term payouts, but larger and greater investment in Chinese manufactured goods and Chinese service partnerships that are subsidized today will end up putting this economy and this culture in a position I don't think they want to be in 40 years from now, tomorrow. And so it's an opportunity, but it's also a double-edged sword.
And you know a lot about energy flows as well, and you know the fact that all of the energy from this region now goes east. How do you square that? I mean, they'd have to have an economic business relationship.
Yeah.
And Ambassador Corbin, jump in too if you have something to say on this. But
well, I would just point out the lobby of the Emirates Palace is full of Chinese tourists now. This is the new global crossroads. This is where people are coming from Africa, Asia, and all of those areas. And they used to go to Europe and they used to go to the States. They're coming here. The newspapers say that the Dubai real estate market is a disaster. It is bad, but guess who's buying Dubai properties? Chinese, and that's an outflow of capital that's getting away from the Chinese government, which I don't think is a negative thing. I think the Chinese will be here. It's part of the new global crossroads, where I think the U.S. needs to stand up to China is providing the technology, providing access to the things that we do best. Higher education, NYU Abu Dhabi, Cleveland Clinic, our medical research and technology, and business, entrepreneurship. And they look to the Arab countries will look to us as a model, and the U.A.E. is at the forefront of applying our models. And we need to continue to push those, and the Chinese models are not what they want to adopt here.
did you want to say something, Marty? No. Okay. Do you want to add anything from a technology standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's very important to keep the takeaway from our lessons learned, expanding into China specifically, where a lot of the IP was kind of reverse engineered, cyber-wise specifically. And I think it'll be very important for them to just kind of keep that in the back of their minds, not necessarily that it would happen again, but just it's good to know. And then, as far as the embracing the tolerance, I think, of course, is helpful in every environment and every relationship. And I think that they should definitely continue to promote that moving forward, and don't start problems where they don't already exist necessarily.
So let's tie that then back to how the U.S. is perceived in the region here today, and what are the opportunities maybe to shift that a little bit going forward. Clearly, from what we've heard over the last day of the conference, there's a view that the role of the U.S. is diminished in the Middle East today. It has been diminished. Under both President Obama and President Trump, there have been concerns about the United States' staying power, commitment to the region. President Obama spoke often of the U.S. pivot to Asia, said the Gulf states needed to share the region with Iran, walked away from his red line in Syria. But President Trump has been accused of betraying the United States' interests here with, leaving the Kurdish allies in Syria, not responding forcibly enough to the recent attack on Saudi Aramco facility. So where does that leave us? And I really want to pull in Ambassador Corbin's very important point that it's our business and our soft power that is what folks want from us and appreciate from us, our stability, our rule of law. If that's more under question, if that's more under threat for us internally at home going forward, where does that leave us in this region in the future? Go ahead, Marty.
Well, I was thinking about it, this discussion as we keep focusing on the positive aspects of American culture, from education to technology. The one thing that's one of America's greatest weapons, besides policy, when Washington's in chaos and Washington doesn't know what it's doing, is American businessmen abroad. I've seen it time and time again in various places of conflict. At the same time, emerging markets, American businessmen are our special weapon. And I believe firmly, just as in the U.A.E, you see American businessmen here very successful, I believe that's our go-to card as we help the region and move forward.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack about this, but I think briefly a lot has been conflated in President Trump's messaging, and the first has been his desire to pull back militarily. I think he has an equal and opposite desire to push more economically into the region, but hasn't necessarily manifested that in a way that has been clearly understood or quantifiable. And so I really believe personally it was the counterterrorism message that he was delivering in his first year in office. He was asking for a recalibration of military investment against that threat, and he was not speaking more holistically. It has been interpreted more holistically now, but I don't think that's his intent. And I'm not being political when I say this, but I believe my read of domestic politics suggests that he'll be reelected. And I think his intention here is to break the myth that he or the United States are only in the Middle East because of Israel and oil. I think there's a larger investment opportunity here, and that's kind of the way he thinks about it.
Okay, Bossert.
I think a strong corporate America is good news for the Middle East, and I think that a lot of the administrations I've worked with have tried to pull troops out of the Middle East. It's not just the Trump administration. Yeah. I think the point on soft power is the important one. What do people want from us? They want our technology, they want our higher education, they want our medicine, and they also want entertainment. They want Hollywood, they want contemporary art. The Guggenheim will be built here. It's delayed, but it will be built here. We have an opportunity to present America that's very, very strong on the soft power, but we can't forget the security relationship, and we have to support the military presence here in a very, very dangerous and unstable region.
So the three legs of the stool, as I always talk about in my speeches, are the security relationship, the diplomatic political relationship, and the economic business relationship. Very, very important. You want to add a point or two?
Yeah, just quickly. I know we're running out of time, but when Putin was here in October, that's one of the things he really drove home was, the Trump administration is kind of faltering, and he promises, right? And he promises, and he keeps his promises essentially. And culturally, it's very important to keep your word, and I think that that's something that we definitely need to be able to do to perform. Absolutely.
So lightning round question for each of you. It's 4 years from now. It's coming into the advent of the last year of a second Trump administration or the last year of a new Democratic administration. Who knows? We heard one prediction on the stage, but will America's role in this region be further diminished 4 years from now, or will it be stronger 4 years from now? Or are we status quo? I'll give you three options, and maybe just say a word about what your answer is.
I believe absolutely stronger, mainly because regardless of the politics of doom or gloom or who's going to predict who's going to win, yep. And either one, I do believe that the American businessman, American culture, this region likes that, and also the important thing is our cyber world. Things move at lightning speed among the youth. The youth are absolutely more in tune with what's going on a daily basis from their iPhones than most people in many generations before. And I think that will be compelling and moving our influence even greater than it is now.
Thank you. Don?
It depends on what happens with Iran. And I actually think, conversely, if Iran goes worse, America's stronger. And if Iran goes peacefully and the regime changes and things happen positively, then maybe the United States isn't as necessary here to every player as it had once been. But that's my lightning round prediction.
Got it. Thank you.
My prediction is with Marty, it's going to be stronger because there are no alternatives. China has enormous domestic problems that it's working on. The EU has enormous problems coordinating. The U.S. system is going to be the strong option, and we're going to be stronger here.
Dominique.
I would definitely agree with Stronger because as far as cyber goes, AI is the way of the future, and the U.S. is leading a lot of that, and I'm sure that they'll be here doing the same.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're down to 10 seconds, so we did really well on the timing. How about a nice warm round of applause for our panelists?